What is going on, gunfighters? Modern day crusaders standing up to fight against evil. Good, strong, dangerous men. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about Average Joe, or Conceal Carry for Noobs, or Conceal Carry 101, however you want to put that. The basics of getting into conceal carry. Maybe you're listening, maybe you have a gun, maybe you don't. Maybe you're considering getting into everyday carry of a firearm. And even if you're not, hopefully you will glean much from this episode. That's what we're going to talk about today. Going to plug in the bio because I think it demonstrates real-world first-hand experience that God's allowed me to have. Then we'll get into the main topic. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life where I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion. And West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to the podcast. So you want to start carrying a firearm. You want to be acquainted with it. You want to be familiar with it. You want to be effective with it. Where to start? Number one, I'm going to tell you to start the way you should start any endeavor, with prayer. Know God, know yourself, and know your weapon, in that order. But pray before any endeavor, especially one as serious as this. You see, a gun is not a security blankie. It doesn't do anything in and of itself. It's neither good nor evil. It's chunks of various different materials, metal, wood, plastic, springs. They're just components. So, if you're going to carry a gun, realize that it's just a tool. It's not going to make you any safer just by carrying it. Why are you carrying it? What will you not do? Ethics. And not on some objective morality. On the Word of God. What is right and what is wrong. When is it appropriate to take a life? Use of deadly force. When is it authorized? Thankfully, our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Our laws were written out of the Bible. You can like that or not, but that's the way that it is. And thankfully, in a lot of places and jurisdictions, they still line up, especially as far as the use of deadly force goes. When is it okay? You have to have those hard lines before I think you ever intend on carrying a gun for defense, right? Because you're carrying it for defense, not a security blankie. You may draw it out and the person committing the evil deed may defecate in their pants and turn away, sucking their thumb, and run away. But They may not. You may have to use it. So know when and be prepared mentally. And do some soul searching as to when and when you will not use that weapon, because in the moment is not the time to figure that out. Next, safety. Now this is for beginners. I'm going to start you off with 2. There are more. This is beginning. Before you ever pick up a gun, load a gun, remember these 2. And I'm going to make them as basic. You can memorize whatever version you want, but I'm going to make these as simple and basic as possible. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on target and you intend to shoot. If you follow those 2, you have to break both of those simultaneously for something bad to happen. In general, unless there's some kind of weird equipment malfunction. Stuck firing pin or something like that. But in general, those 2 safety rules, and even so, if it's pointed in a safe direction, then you're good. So those 2. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Keep your finger off the trigger till your sights are on target and you intend to shoot. It's about as simple and as basic as I can make it. And there are more safety rules than that. This is not intended to be a safety class. Next. And I'm kind of conflicted here on the order. You may want to get some training. You may want to get the gear after you get a basic grasp on safety. And then get some training so you can train with your own gear. Many jurisdictions have constitutional carry. Some jurisdictions require you to get a piece of paper from a governing authority saying you can carry a firearm concealed. So I'm not here to argue the legitimacy of that. I'm here to tell you that that is what it is. So deal with that if you need to deal with that. Now let's get into gear. And remember, this is basics. These are not my favorites per se. These are not telling you these are the best. Remember, this is concealed carry for beginners. So maybe this is one if you're an advanced person. Maybe this is one to share with somebody because, as Jesus says, no prophet has honor in his own country. They may not listen to you no matter how much you tell them the same things. So maybe sharing, the tales of a professional gunfighter with them and advice from somebody else will be helpful. But I think even if you are into guns and are already down this path, you can glean from it. Gear. The stuff guys always like, right, to talk about, to chat about. The gear. Carry. First thing I'm going to say, a knife. Now, I just did a whole episode on tactical knives. I might try something different and actually put links of the episodes down in the show notes. If you're listening to this, you should be able to scroll down and hit that if you want to listen to that, or put it on the up next queue, depending on your listener app. Also, I've done many on Alpha Male Podcast on knives, but carry a knife. So I'm going to get a little bit into that. This is a very cursory glance. Carry a knife. Most people are going to carry a folding knife. I would say a folding knife that locks with a 3 to 5 inch blade. If this is GunfighterLife, why am I starting out with a knife? Well, I think men should just carry a knife, generally. I think that's generally true. There are many scenarios where a knife comes in handy, whether or not the use of a gun comes into play. Also, in that interim where you feel very competent with a gun, competent enough to carry it and trust other people's lives to your abilities, because that's what you're doing. With power comes responsibility. To whom much is given, much will be required. If you're carrying around an implement that can quickly take a human life, right, and that's what it is, then you had better feel competent to trust other people's lives to your abilities. Until you get to that point, maybe carry the knife, and carry it as more than an Amazon box opener. Carry it as a defensive tool. Think of it as a defensive tool. A good crossover utility implement. If you decide, perhaps look at carrying a fixed blade. Same thing, 3 to 5 inch blade. I don't care if it's a $20 Walmart Gerber or whatever it is with inflation now, $35. Whatever the cost is, a cheap Walmart Gerber or a really fancy expensive Gerber. Or any number. Kershaw, Cold Steel, I don't care. I'm not sponsored by anybody, and I like to keep it that way. Whatever good usable knife you want to use, start with that. Next, I think I'm going to get to the gun, but not yet. How about a cell phone? Now, most of you already carry a cell phone anyway. But it's important, right? Communications. If you think you might get into a deadly force situation before or after that use of deadly force, you're probably going to want to communicate. Also, as a way of gathering information on situations. If you've lived through the past couple of years, which if you're old enough to carry a gun, you have, you're probably familiar with certain areas of the country going through civil unrest and rioting and looting. Gathering information. I used to say gathering intel, but one of my patrons pointed out, hey, you're wrong. And you know what? He's right. I am wrong. You don't gather intel. You gather information, which makes you intelligent. He pointed that out. He's right. So you have the cell phone as a way to gather information and hopefully avoid dangerous situations. So, cell phone. Next, here we go. Gun. What gun? This is probably where everybody's going to get, I guess a pun wasn't intended, but it's a good one, up in arms. What gun to pick for C.C.W.? Alright. I'm going to tell you some things to look for, and then I'm going to give you actual picks of what I think are some of the top ones. But don't make the mistake of going uber small. These little, you're new to concealed carry and you think everybody's going to see your gun, so you want to carry this little tiny minuscule pipsqueak gun. I don't care how powerful it is. I don't care if it's a little tiny minuscule pipsqueak 44 Magnum. Get a gun that you can handle. The smaller the gun, in general, the harder they are to shoot. And I have this issue a lot of times with new shooters, especially women, but I see it with men too. And I'll try and use this illustration. It doesn't work as good because I like to do it in person with two actual guns. Let's say I have two 9mm. One is a full-size police duty handgun. Pick your whatever. If you know a little bit about guns, a Glock 17, and next to it on the table, I put a Glock 43. I do believe the very smallest 9mm Glock they make. Both the exact same cartridge. If I could just lay them on the table and make the triggers go off, which one of them would fly backwards farther on the table? Now think about that. A lot of people actually get it wrong. The small one, the Glock 43, right, is going to fly a lot farther than that Glock 17 because it weighs less. The same thing happens when you're holding it in your hand. The smaller gun, in general, with the same amount of force, is going to have more recoil. I put it kind of like this. That recoil is going to go into two places, into the gun and into your body. The less the gun absorbs, the more goes into your body. Also, just as far as manipulations and handling and getting a good, proper grip on the gun. And smaller guns are harder to shoot. Smaller sight radius, harder to grab the slide to clear malfunctions, all kinds of things. So stay away from these baby guns, especially at first. I think they're more of an expert gun. I love my Smith & Wesson J-frame. I love my little Smith & Wesson J-frame 357 Magnum 360 PD. It weighs like, I want to say 11 ounces and some change. Let me double check that. Yeah, 11.7 ounces. Put that in perspective. A standard 1911 weighs over 40 ounces. And it's a 357. However, it's super easy to carry. However, it is an expert's gun. Yeah, anybody can make it go off, but hitting targets with it effectively, that's an expert's gun. And I'm going to say it's kind of that same way for a little tiny LCP. Not that it's not a decent gun, not that it's not reliable. It's a lot harder to shoot and shoot effectively than a more sizable weapon. So really think about that. The goal is not to have a gun on you, right? It's not a security blankie. Remember the beginning. It is not a security blankie. The mere fact that you have it doesn't do anything except potentially arm your adversary. Also, really give thought to if you're in the mindset of, oh, I'll just have to pull it out and I won't have to do anything. Really consider yourself and what you're saying there. If hitherto you've thought that way, maybe change your mind on that. Maybe do a deep search on that. The reason I would submit you are carrying a firearm is to stop evil people from doing evil things, or maybe perhaps a violent animal encounter. In either case, the point of having the gun is to be effective with it and change behavior, whether man or beast. And you're going to be able to be much more effective with a full-size fighting handgun to a mid-size. A mid-size, if you want a balance of concealability, but I'm going to tell you that first. And although they're not my favorite, and I'm not a big fan of them for a lot of applications, especially the intermediate to advanced gunfighter, but for the beginner, and I think this is why one of the reasons, besides being cheap to manufacture, they've become so popular. Striker fired, which is usually going to denote polymer. Polymer striker fired handguns. They're a good place to start. Maybe not a good place to stay, but a good place to start. So a mid-size polymer striker fired handgun. They have an easy manual of arms. You decide for yourself whether you want a manual safety or a non-manual safety. There's all kinds of debate on this. I run both. I've run both for years. I don't really care. I don't think one is better than the other. There's always a risk versus reward analysis, and there are benefits and detriments to both, and I think it's an even wash, if I'm being honest. So pick whichever one you want. And yes, I am going to give you some actual models. Make some models. Now remember, I don't have any sponsors. If you like that and you appreciate the honesty, consider becoming a patron. But I'm going to give you some exact models. My first pick, I don't know you, I don't know your hand size, I don't, unless you're somebody I know personally or a patron, I don't really know you. So, Smith & Wesson M&P, regular size, which I would consider compact, but they'll call it a full size with a 4 and something inch barrel. I consider a full size gun a 5-inch barrel, but to not confuse you, just their full size Smith & Wesson M&P. That's going to be my number one choice for most people. For a lot of reasons. I did a whole episode on that. I will make a note to put that in the show notes. If you just want me to carte blanche, top pick, Smith & Wesson M&P full size. And then if you're not willing to carry a gun that big, the compact. Not the Shield, not the Baby Shield EZ. Again, I think those are more expert guns, even though they're marketed for beginners. I would challenge anybody that's new to shoot a couple of defensive drills with that, or a full-size, mid-size Smith & Wesson M&P. So the mid-size, which they call a compact, either one of those, it's still big enough to get a full grip. It's still big enough to be effective. I'm going to tell you, start there. If there's something that turns you off about the Smith & Wesson M&P, you want this one more, I'm going to tell you go SIG 320-ish. I don't care if it's the full size, which I would consider the M17 size. M17 is just a military designation, but the SIG M17, M18 is the shorter slide. Still big enough to be a good fighting handgun, to be effective. I would say look there, or a 320, similar in size. And there's not the whole thing, but a big part of the 320 why it's popular is it's modular. You can change out barrels and slides and grips. Fire control unit is one piece. It pops out. It's not as easy as it sounds, but it's fairly easy to do. So I'm not going to give you exact models on that, but a compact, not a super baby one, but a mid-size to full-size SIG 320 M17 M18. The modularity, especially if you're new and you're getting into it, you may decide this grip doesn't work really well for me. Instead of buying a whole new gun, you can get another grip module or modify it with a Dremel tool when it's unloaded. And if you destroy it, then you're out, $50, $100 instead of $500, $600, like if you did it to a lot of other guns, or whatever the cost is now. So the SIG 320 family, you might look there. Next, if you really want to, you can look at Glock. Glock 19 is really popular for a reason. It's that good size. I like Glock 17s better than 19s, but if you're not willing to carry a gun the size of a 17, the 19, and police officers sometimes do carry that as their duty gun. It is big enough to be effective as a fighting handgun, and it's small enough that a lot of people can still carry it. It's probably one of the most popular concealed carry handguns. So if you just have been indoctrinated into the Glock kind of thing, whatever you want to call it, culture, whatever it is, if you want a Glock, I'd say start with the Glock 19. And don't go uber small. I would not recommend a 43 for a new shooter. I would say challenge anybody, whether new, intermediate, or advanced shooter, to shoot a course of fire with a 43 and then with a 19. And remember, the goal is to be effective. If you're a new shooter, you're almost certainly going to be less effective. So why hinder yourself? Why handicap yourself even more by getting a less effective platform? Caliber is easy: 9mm, 9mm, 9mm. If you want to train a lot first, and you may carry it, 22. If you want to get a similar platform, like you want to get a Smith & Wesson M&P in 22, or you want to get the Glock in 22 and train with it until you get the 9mm. I'd say that's fine. I have an episode in the queue. I don't know if it'll come out before or after this one on self-defense with the 22, concealed carry with the 22. But other than that, 9mm. Really, 9mm. Especially for the beginner. Do I think 45 has some advantages? Yes, I do. And I like 45. But we're talking beginners, especially for a lot of reasons: recoil and cost of ammo, 9mm. Next, not everything is a semi-auto. What about revolvers? I really like revolvers. I really like J-frames. But I'm going to tell you again, I think a J-frame is an expert's gun. They're easy to make go bang, but they're harder to be effective with. I'm going to say, if you're looking at a revolver, look at a medium to full size, duty size revolver. Something in the 3 to 4 inch barrel length. And I'm going to say Smith & Wesson K-frame or equivalent. If you want to know what a bunch of those are, just go into your Google search engine and type Smith & Wesson K-frame versus, and it'll probably pop up with a bunch of stuff. But not the super subcompact snub-nose revolvers. I love those. I sometimes carry one, but not for a beginner. I would never recommend one of those for a beginner. A medium size, a Smith & Wesson K-frame, like a Combat Masterpiece or a Combat Magnum. I'm going to tell you, get one in 38 Special 357. Start with 38 Special, train with 38 Special. You may decide later you want to work up to 357 Magnum, and that's one of the cool things about that chambering. You can shoot both. But 38 Special, cops carried it in this country for decades and decades. It's a proven caliber. I'd rather have you hit your target well with a 38 than miss it with a 357. But a medium-size revolver. Again, 3 to 5 inch barrel, 4 is going to be most common. Like your Smith & Wesson K-frame, your Colt Python in 4 inch, something like that. Now ammo, and I'm going to be careful not to go down a deep, deep rabbit hole here, because I could talk about ammo and ballistics and internal and external and terminal for, I could do a whole show called, terminal ballistics. Do episode after episode. However, I'm going to tell you to look at the end from the beginning, figure out what load you may want to carry and what is likely to expand out of your gun and your barrel length. Some real quick ones: Spear Gold Dot, Decided Grain, 115, 124, 147. I'm going to tell you to stay away from plus P ammo, especially for a new shooter. If you decide you want to go there later, that's on you. But Spear Gold Dot, Winchester Ranger, Remington Golden Saber. These are all big, well-known names. Get something that's around and proven, not some whiz-bang, going to be, supposed to be, cheating the law of physics and being the next greatest, latest Gucci thing. Get a proven, street-proven round. Choose one of those, look at one of those, and you may decide your gun doesn't like it later, but at least start with one in mind, and then get a similar grain weight and hopefully same manufacturer training ammo. For instance, Spear Gold Dot 124s, and I don't even like that load, I'm just picking it. It's a good middle of the road load. You can get the 124s in Spear Gold Dot, good street proven round, and you can get Spear Lawman, which is designed with the same bullet profile, bullet weight, velocity in mind, and it should shoot the same point of aim, point of impact. It's designed to do so, same feeding geometry and everything. You could go that route. You could go any number of routes. That's just one example. But if you're new, you may not even realize this, but not all ammo shoots out of all guns, even if it's really good ammo. And also, it's virtually, let's just say it's very, very unlikely that let's say a 115 grain ball round, full metal jacket, cheap training round, going to shoot the same place as a 147 grain defensive round, especially on a tilting barrel system, which I don't want to get too far into that. But think about that. Think about your defensive load, I would say, first, and then choose a practice load off of that. Okay, hopefully we didn't go too deep into the ammo. Let's go down the line of EDC, C.C.W. stuff. A flashlight. Why? Because bad things happen at night. And I'm not a big fan of carrying a gun with a light on it, a weapon-mounted flashlight for a handgun for this purpose. For a home defense gun, a big full-size home defense gun, I'd say okay. Even when I was a cop, even when I was a private contractor, commander of a tactical team, which you'd think surely you would have a handgun weapon-mounted light, but I didn't like them. Just make that gun really big and unwieldy. The holsters look like they're pregnant, getting in and out of vehicles, just day to day. And you could say, oh, get a super small gun with a light. I don't like that trade. You may decide you do, and plenty of tactical people do. They want the Glock 43 with the light on it, and that will add some mass and absorb some recoil. But if it's me, and you're coming to me for advice with the experience and training that God's blessed me to get through, I'm much more on the side of get a decent fighting handgun and carry a light separate. Because even if you have a weapon-mounted handgun light, you're still going to want a handheld flashlight if something bad happens in the dark, which a lot of bad things do. Because there's plenty of situations that call for light where you don't want to be pointing a gun at that thing. The vast majority, I would say. So either way, you're going to have a light. If you decide you want a weapon-mounted light later, I'm not going to tell you they're a horrible idea. I'm just saying I don't prefer them, and I certainly wouldn't recommend them for a beginner. You have enough to think about getting that handgun into action and shoot or no shoot, and there's a lot going on there. Trigger control, focusing on the front sight. So, handheld flashlight. Don't go lumen crazy, right? A couple of hundred lumens is all you need. I have no idea why they make these 1,000 lumen or whatever for a handgun. For a rifle, maybe. But for a handgun, you can get too many lumens. You can, for instance, go to clear a bathroom and be all but blind for the duration of a gunfight because that light bouncing off a white wall or even a mirror, which is even worse, just is way too many lumens. A couple hundred is fine. Let me pull the one out of my pocket. It is a Streamlight Micro Stream. It's USB rechargeable. I think they make one that takes a battery. They're not overly expensive. There's a Stylus Pro, I think. Anything like that that's small enough that you're going to carry and not really notice it. It's not going to hinder your day-to-day operations. I find you use this a lot in C.C.W, EDC type stuff where you don't necessarily draw your handgun except for practice that much. The next thing I'm going to tell you, look and consider really hard carrying a tourniquet and knowing how to use it. You may find, well, let's just say there's not a lot of crossover. If you need a gun, you need a gun, and a tourniquet is not the tool. If you need a tourniquet, a gun is not the tool. If you're looking at being prepared, being ready to help people and fight against evil, and you're carrying a knife and a gun, I would really look at carrying a tourniquet. Now, I'm going to tell you the best ones are the cats, but they're fairly big. I carry a rat, and I know a lot of people don't like that. You don't really have to know what these are right now. You can look them up later. I do have TCCC training. I am TCCC trained. I know that they're not TCCC certified, but it's what, and I carry it. It's on my belt right now. It's on my belt when I go to the gym. It's on my belt when I'm riding in the car. The cats, for me, are just a little bit bigger than I'm going to carry, but they are the best ones. There's the cat, the rat, the SWAT T, the SOF. Pick one and be fairly acquainted with how to, stop an arterial bleed. Also be a good time to brush up on your first aid. Used to be your ABCs, now it's your March algorithm. Just be acquainted with how to save life. Hopefully that is a big reason you carry a gun, to prevent the loss of life. You may be called upon to do that with a firearm. You may be called upon to do that with a tourniquet or with a cell phone. So they're just tools. They're different tools for different things. Consider carrying a tourniquet. I guess I'll also link to one on the March algorithm. Now, I mentioned training. You might have to take a C.C.W. class. I would not consider that, none of the C.C.W. training I've ever seen, the end-all be-all for firearms training. Get some training. I have no real affiliation other than I've had a lot of training in my life, and if I'm going to recommend one, and I don't think I mentioned it anymore in the bio, but I'm an FBI certified firearms instructor, handgun instructor. I am NRA certified. I also taught as a professional firearms instructor at one of the biggest firearms training academies in the country. I've taught military, civilian, law enforcement, did it as a full-time job, managed training for a company, and what I'm going to mention is none of those. But of all the training I've had, it's probably the best, most practical. If you're looking for a good handgun training or rifle training, PFC, Progressive Force Concepts, out of Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're looking at going on vacation, maybe make it a tactical vacation, unless you live within driving distance of Vegas. One of the great things about Vegas is that flights in and out of there are fairly cheap because they want you to go and waste a bunch of money gambling. However, if you go there for training, it might be a good investment. Probably a lot higher ROI than going to a slot machine. But anyway, PFC, you can look those up. They have no affiliation with me. They didn't ask me for a shout out. I've just had a lot of training, and if I'm going to recommend one, I'm going to recommend that one. Not even the ones I used to work for. I'm going to recommend that one. Get some kind of useful training, and that includes the fundamentals. It includes getting your gun into action from its place of storage, meaning your holster. I'm going to recommend strong side outside the waistband. You can vary from that if you want, especially for new people. I don't recommend appendix. I don't recommend a shoulder holster. If you're asking what I recommend strong side, hip, 3 o'clock, outside the waistband. A good positive retention Kydex holster. If you want to go inside the waistband, that's okay. But if you're asking what I recommend, that's where I would start. You may decide to dissent from that and do your own thing, that's fine. But if you're asking me, that's what I'm going to tell you. And a lot of training courses you take are going to ask you to do that too. Why are you going to go pay for training and get trained a certain way and then carry a different way? You may decide you have to. You may decide you can only pocket carry or any number of other things in a non-permissive environment. However, that's where I'm going to tell you, especially for newbies. Next, some self-training, because that's a big thing you get from training, is not just the training you get in the class, but learning how to teach yourself and learning what to do. I'm going to give you some drills and I want to keep it basic. If you want to be effective, you need to have good fundamentals. You need a firm foundation. Slow fundamentals. Now, I mentioned a little bit the guns. I would ask you to consider, even in 2023, iron sights. Even if you decide later you want to run an optic, especially at first, learn how to run iron sights. It's still the case that the vast majority of handguns have iron sights. I would liken it to, I think you should still learn to drive a manual transmission, even though a lot of the world has gone automatic. There's still some value, and there's a lot of crossover. If you're good with iron sights, you can translate that to optics. And you may decide you want to go with an optic. I would say get an optics-ready gun, especially in 2023. There's a lot of good options. The ones I mentioned to you should have, well, except for the revolver. The semi-autos that I mentioned should have optics-ready capability. And you may decide you want to do that, but I would say at first, iron sight fundamentals. Be competent at hitting, no time limit, just the fundamentals, a man-sized target, whether that's a B-27 or an IPSC or USPSA target, one of those analogs at 25 yards consistently. And that's not even where I would stop. That's not my standard. This is for new people. And people will say, well, most gunfights are at 3 yards. That's an average. That also includes contact shots and suicides a lot of the time. So look at those stats. There's a lot of cases where it's farther than that. I would say if you want a place to start, focus on the fundamentals, consistent hits on a man-sized silhouette at 25 yards. And don't settle for that, but focus on that for your first hurdle in the race. Right? Just slow fire, focusing on the fundamentals. Again, you need a firm foundation. If your trigger control stinks, it's not going to get any better generally. You're trying to do a bunch of other stuff. So, fundamentals. And I'm not going to go over the fundamentals here. It would be a very long podcast. Next, controlled pairs. Getting a good sight picture or a flash sight picture on both shots, but doing consecutive shots. 2 shots. Not because I think you should always fire 2 shots. You should fire to stop the threat, change the behavior of the adversary you're dealing with. That might be 1 shot. That might be all the rounds you have. And then you have to go to a knife. You have to get some reps in with the knife. I don't know what the scenario is going to be. You shoot to change behavior, however many rounds that is. What those controlled pairs will do is get you used to a follow-up shot. Whether or not you have to take the follow-up shot, it will get you used to it. And then I would look at an old classic, Mozambique drill. 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. If you want a good general thing, I would say look at accomplishing that at 7 yards. You know what that is for you. Maybe you're not there yet. Maybe for you can only do that at 3 yards. That's fine. Try and work it back a little bit. And I'm not going to give you time limits, but I'll tell you for a lot of defensive encounters, they can be over in less than 3 seconds. So maybe use that as a rough benchmark. Also, practice one-handed. Cut that distance in half. Doesn't have to be exactly in half, right? 12 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, somewhere in there. Focus on your one-handed fundamentals. Getting hits on that man-sized silhouette at that distance. Both dominant hand and support hand. Right-handed, left-handed. And then, again, a lot of bad things happen at night. Learn a flashlight technique. There are many. Experiment with a couple of them. Dry fire. Pick one that you like. And at first, have a go-to one. There are many, but again, at first, pick one. Be familiar with it. Learn how to shoot one-handed and with a flashlight in the other. Again, a lot of bad things happen at night. And then, to kind of culminate your skills, I would say look at shooting the FBI qualification. Not because it's the best qualification out there, not because it's the most practical, because everybody kind of knows and recognizes the FBI. I consider shooting it and passing it and getting a witness or two to sign your target and keeping it. Even when I was a commander of a tactical team, we had much harder qualifications, but we also shot the FBI qual. Why? For court reasons. If you ever had to go to court, you could and bring in some witnesses and say, this person shot and passed the FBI qualification. Even the person that's never picked up a gun in their life, especially them, because that's probably who you're going to have to persuade, who's never been in use of force encounter, proving competency with a firearm. If you say you passed the FBI qual and can prove it with a testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, most people are going to take it that you are at least competent with a firearm. So I would consider looking at, maybe you don't pass it the first time, maybe you keep at it, but when you pass it and can consistently pass it, have a witness sign off on it. Consider doing that every once in a while. And I think that's a good place to at least start getting out of the main episode and talking about some wrap-up stuff. Again, the serious business. I like guns. I wish that most American males were armed. I really do. I think we'd be better off. But if you are going to take that on, you also need to take on the responsibility. It is a weighty, weighty thing to take a human life. So you need to think about that probably before you just go buy the next cool gun and put it on your hip. Again, I started with prayer, morals, and ethics. So make sure you have firm grasp of the fundamentals of those. You shall not murder. What's the difference between murder and manslaughter? And defense and justifiable use of deadly force? Well, it's in the Bible. Our laws were based on it. Go read it. Especially Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. I actually remember when I was studying Nevada state law, their statute is literally written word for word out of a passage of the Bible for what is manslaughter. So that's a good foundation, and maybe get acquainted with your local things. Is there castle doctrine? Is there duty to retreat? All that stuff. But start with a firm foundation, and that rock foundation is God, is Jesus Christ. Now for your tactical tip of the day. At some point, you're going to have to reload. And you get past the point of administrative reloads and trying to do it more tactically. A couple of kinds of reloads, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to get into the tactical tip, a little ditty. And that's what we called it in the Marine Corps. It doesn't sound too manly, but we call it a ditty, like a little saying to help us remember. It's a saying for quick, efficient reloads, whether they're tactical, speed reload, emergency, out of battery, whatever you want to call it. You shoot an iron sights, when that shot breaks, you most likely should be focused on the front sight. So, front sight, mag well, target, front sight. And that's what your eyes should be doing. That's really important, whether it's target transitions, fundamentals, whatever it is. What are your eyes doing? Your eyes should be focused on the front sight. Shot breaks. You should be looking inside that mag well because that's where you want that spare magazine to go. Once it's in there, you want to reacquire the target. So you need to find the target and you need to refocus on the front sight. So, front sight, mag well, target, front sight. A little ditty to help you remember to be efficient and effective on your reloads. Feel free to take that. Gifts and blessings from God are meant to be shared. And with that, that's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. New King James, Exodus 22. If a thief is found breaking in, and he is struck, so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. Getting into some of that firm foundation. With that, men, reminds me of another verse, as verses often do. Watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong. That's from 1 Corinthians 16:13. And I think that's a good way to wrap up the episode. Watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit ye like men, be strong. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.